he is, Arden Shibley.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll get right to it. First of all, how did I secure funding to go to Sochi? It was rather an expensive trip. A lot of airfare and accommodations there weren't too cheap. I would like to give a big thank you, first of all, to Alberta. They made the trip possible, taking care of most of the expenses when it came to traveling to Russia to see the games and do everything that I did. This presentation will be available after. I'll upload it to my website, snarePhoto.com/SACPA. You can see the presentation, the images if you missed anything, want to check something out, if you're watching the feed and follow along or anything like that. So first of all, some background on Sochi 2014. The games were awarded to Sochi in 2007, so about 7 years before the games go. The International Olympic Committee makes a decision. They choose a host city and say, we're going to give you the games. It was the first Olympics held in Russia, barring the 1980 games in Moscow, which was technically held in the USSR. A lot changed in the 7 years between the time that the IOC awarded the games to Sochi and when they actually executed, or when they came to fruition in Sochi. There was a lot of issues and a lot of controversy that arose in those 7 years, even up to things that arose a week before the games started, issues that people had never heard about before. So it's called the Sochi Games, but it's not really in Sochi. The games are held in two areas. One is Adler on the coast, that's a coastal cluster. The other is Krasnaya Polyana, which is the mountain cluster. So some of the venues are on the coast, some are in the mountains. Nothing's really in Sochi. Sochi is just the larger economic hub, I suppose. But all the tourists, everybody was in Adler. I was there for 14 days. I stayed in rural Adler, about 5 kilometers from the coastal cluster, so I was a little bit of a ways from the nice, clean, and bright, banner-covered, branded Sochi Games. So I got to see Adler for what it really is, I would say. This is the house that I stayed in. I stayed with a local Russian couple. I lived with a Russian, 2 Germans, and an American man through the course of the games. We all found it through Airbnb, kind of like vacation rental by owner, all that. It was interesting. So people said, did you have brown water and stuff? And I wasn't in a brand new hotel, so there wasn't a lot of water issues or some of the things that you saw on the internet circulating. There was like, oh my God, the accommodations aren't ready, but that was my accommodation. So let's see, I did spend some time at Olympic Park. I spent a number of days there walking around talking to athletes, fans, officials, locals, whatever. I spent some time outside the games as well, answering a lot of the questions. I wanted to provide an on-the-ground account, this is what I told Elperg, of the games, because it's really different from what you see from Canada on the media. It's really, what they decide to share is what you hear. And I wanted to find the truth behind a lot of the controversies that arose coming up to the games, because there was so many different things that came up in the news, like dogs and gay rights and all sorts of things. People are like, oh my God, this is the most controversial Olympics yet, and it's Russia. Russia in itself is just inherently, on the world stage, there's a lot of questions and a lot of issues. So, first of all, let's see, day-to-day, the Olympics. Did it have the Olympic spark was one question discussed on the ground. People were speculating, did it feel like Vancouver 2010? And people said, oh, you're from Canada, did you go to Vancouver? I said, well, no, I was in school and that was a different situation. But this is a picture from the opening ceremonies. There were 5, I'm sure a lot of you watched them, there were 5 snowflakes that were supposed to open up into Olympic rings. One of them failed to do so, and I heard an interesting metaphor in that, like these Olympic rings, the games were very large, very powerful, and very symbolic, but in some ways they felt incomplete, according to some of the people that were on the ground there. So other things on the ground there day to day. A lot of the time when they didn't, when they didn't have flowers to put on the streets, they put pictures of flowers. A very Russian thing to do. How much of the games was really, was for show? There was a number of facades that were put on when it came to tourists arriving in the city. What you saw on television, such as that opening, I heard the Olympic ring that did not open was not shown on TV originally. They cut to rehearsal footage from the previous day, so that's kind of an interesting thing of censorship. But was the city really so bad? There was all the controversy, and then once people got there, all they saw was this big, beautiful, freshly paved, freshly built facade of the Olympics. And I can't really speak. I haven't been to any other Olympic Games, but it felt, it was a show that was put on for sure, as the Olympic Games usually are. So this is a very large Sochi banner, English and Russian. Here we see a tourist having a picture taken in front of the banner. And behind it, little did she know, was a naval base where there were a number of ships that were moored. It's kind of interesting to see how the Olympic Committee covered up a lot of what was there. So they had these ships that were patrolling on the coast. And this was a naval base, and they said, put a banner on it. Seemed to be a very common thing around Sochi. The Olympics were bilingual. If you went, you could make it through with complete English. I was speaking to a number of Canadian athletes, and I'm like, yeah, the Canadians will figure out some Russian. You know, we're usually pretty adaptable. And one of the athletes was like, I don't need any Russian. I can make it around with English completely. I'm totally fine. And that was kind of surprising. My experience, in contrast to that, was I needed to learn some Russian because when I was taking Avtobus 59, which was bus 59, like, I had to figure these things out. Otherwise, I couldn't tell somebody I needed the bus and I needed to go to Ulitsa Chernivitskaya. Like, it was a mess. So I needed to learn Russian. I was really surprised that a lot of the athletes and officials and tourists that were visiting didn't even start. So let's see. Continuing on day-to-day, this is a picture of a freshly paved, freshly street-cleaned road near the Olympic Park train station. In contrast to where I was staying, there were more potholes than there were blades of grass, really, up where I was living. So it was kind of curious when I was near Olympic Park there and I saw the street cleaners going around. I'm like, really, guys? So tourists could live inside what was called the Sochi bubble. Basically, if you were a athlete or official, you were staying in sanctioned accommodations, and that was some of the ones that you heard about the issues. The government, however, was in charge of the athletes' accommodations, and they didn't have too many issues as they did with private hotels. But you could live inside the Sochi bubble. You could basically stay in the hotel and then go to the park and then get on the train and go to the mountain cluster, see some events, come back type thing, and you would never really step outside that crafted, clean, groomed appearance of the games. So that was really interesting, and every day I went in and out of this. So I would wake up in really rural Adler, get on a bus and go to the clean where the banner was and the water was $8 a pop, and then go back to back to where I was living with Alexei, and Anastasia. So how Russian were Russia's Olympics? It was an intense culture being there, definitely. Everything, all the Sochi signs were in English and everything, but nobody there really speaks English. So 1 in 4 volunteers that I spoke to could understand what I was saying. You'd be like, do you speak English? And they'd be like, oh, get that volunteer 50 feet away, right? They can help you out. Aside from the opening ceremonies and closing ceremonies, from what I understand, if you were watching the Olympics on TV, you didn't really see much of Russia's culture or what the city was like. In a way, the city was sort of betrayed by the portrayal of the games and media and television, that you didn't really get a sense of what it's like to be there. And then, of course, I got a whole other sense of being there because I was outside the Sochi bubble. So this is this is a hillside that I walked by every day going to the bus. This is a pretty common sight. In my experience, if it was in rural Adler, basically it was dirty. Excuse me for a second. Slow down, okay. Adler was very polluted. There was trash and litter and plant matter and tires and everything, pretty much anywhere that it could go, and the locals really took no notice of it. It was an entirely different culture, speaking to people that lived there for their entire lives versus what we saw, and I don't think you saw that on TV. So it was a stark contrast between rural Adler, where I was staying, and the Olympic Park, like I said. This was a dumping ground that I came across. The bus that I had to take to Olympic Park was shoddy at best. Sometimes it was half an hour, sometimes it was an hour and a half late, going over the half-hour schedule. People, and when you ask people there, they're like, it's Russia. So I was waiting for the bus, no sign of it. There was, some Russians and a cat waiting for the bus. And we went, and I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. I'm just going to go take a walk, see what I can see. And I came across this. I saw it up from above, and I took a little walk down there, and it was a dumping ground, basically. It's an impromptu dump. There was rubble and different types of dirt and clay and metal rebar that has been just like crumpled up and dumped there. And apparently this is a common sight around Adler and Sochi and other villages in the region. It's not really regulated, and they'll just throw it wherever. I think that this was once a riverbed, and I had a feeling that I was standing on about 10 feet of rubble that was plowed over with dirt. So kind of incredible. It was really surprising when I came across it, and I'm like, anybody else see this? Okay. So was Sochi ready for the games? You know, it was all the preparation. Are they going to be ready? Are they going to have everything good to go? Did Okay, sorry. Are they going to be ready to go when the curtain lifts, basically? And the answer is yes. All the venues, all the infrastructure that needed to be created, the train lines, Olympic Park, all the transportation around there, traffic was good. They had incredible amounts of Sochi buses to transport people, athletes, and officials around need be. So when it came to the bottom line, can they hold the Olympics? The answer is yes. They got the job done, and if they hadn't, they sort of would have been the laughing stock of the worldwide Olympic movement, I suppose. Infrastructure was sufficient. Yeah, required facilities were complete. Okay. Sochi problems, hashtag Sochi problems. For those of you that don't know what a hashtag is, on social media such as Twitter or Facebook, if you put a pound sign in front of a word or phrase with no spaces in there, what it allows you to do is connect with other people and find other content that is related to that word or that phrase. So, for instance, you could hashtag SACPA and read anything to do with SACPA all the way back as far as the first time that somebody mentioned it on social media. So, Sochi problems, the hashtag arose a little leading up about early February, just as the games were starting, and it just exploded. It went viral. Everybody was tweeting and sharing and laughing at pictures of all sorts of things that were happening in Russia that were just weird, like the water coming out of the tap being yellow. I don't know, the lobby, like a hotel that doesn't have a lobby, but it has a picture of Putin. So, yeah, Sochi problems. It was really interesting. The account for Sochi problems reached 360,000 followers at some point. For some reason, now it's defunct with all of 28. I don't know why. It was a college student that started it one day because he was bored in class. Russians, they noticed this hashtag and this topic coming up, and they called it zloradstvo, which basically means malicious glee. So it's like Schadenfreude. Basically, they were puzzled as to why the Western world was taking an interest and sort of almost laughing at the way that things weren't turning out as they were planned, and that things were a little screwy the way that they generally are in Russia. As Vlad on the plane to Moscow told me, he said, things get done in Russia, just never the way that you would expect them to be, and I don't think that could hold more true. It's very different. Just, it's Russia. So. People on the ground there, it was a crazy atmosphere. So one question, Russians were very enthusiastic, just thrilled to have the games. Anytime you were at an event and a Russian came to the start line, or if their team scored or something, Russia was what they chanted, and it was crazy, as is to be expected with any home country. But the question is that excitement valid, or was it a little bit of an Olympic fever because of all the things that we said? What's happening with these games? There's all this, any way you cut it, there's $30 billion of corruption, apparently, behind these games, all with Putin's friends and such, but everybody there didn't seem to take note of it. So locals denied the concerns of Sochi's ill fate. When I said, what's going to happen to these venues after the games? They said, it's fine. Sochi's a tourist destination. People come here all the time. They're going to come and ski and use the venues, and we're going to have the Paralympics. We're going to have the FIFA World Cup. We're going to have the Formula One track. It's going to be great. There's no problems. I'm like, okay, all right. So did Western media then, is my question, did they paint the Olympics with the wrong brush? So when there are reports of controversy and issues in planning and things that aren't going as planned, and there's corruption and embezzlement that we're hearing about with the games, if you keep talking about how badly these things are going to be, maybe they are that way because we assumed it was going to be. We didn't really let it happen by itself. When enough media outlets start to report that this particular thing is going to be an issue, like Sochi won't be ready for the games, Sochi might not be ready for the games, there's all sorts of things pointing towards it, we start to take that as common knowledge and we assume that that's actually the truth. That was one of the reasons why I went to really see how things played out there. Sochi, good or bad? Like I said, I talked to some locals, and I guess I could explain this a little bit. Step away from the mic. This is Olympic Park here, so there's a fence that follows this, and here's some logistics. Again, more logistics than where the athletes were staying. The fence runs like this. This is the Formula One building. The gate is here to Olympic Park. This is the train station, so basically everybody comes in and out on the train, and they go straight into the park. This is a really long walk, by the way. But I went and I was talking to some locals. in that area there. And I said, how long have you lived here? And they said 20 years. So they'd been there through the whole process. They saw the games when they saw the area when it was farmland and when there were locals there, and a lot of them got moved to a village. Apparently, it's something I don't know a lot about. But I asked the man, "Are you happy to have the Olympics here?" And the first thing he said was, "They paved the road." I'm like, okay, all right. So I looked down. Yes, I'm standing on freshly paved road, and beside it was about 6 to 8 inch mud ruts, which is what I presume the road used to look like. So he's like, yeah, it's awesome, and he said that in Russian. Of course, I had no idea what he was saying, but. So he was really happy to have the Olympics. From what I understood, the construction was a very difficult number of years. It was loud, it was noisy, it was dusty, it was dirty. There was a lot of traffic going through the area, which was in contrast to Adler, which was pretty quiet and kind of lush at the time. It's been debated that there were parts of Sochi National Park that were constructed upon that were eliminated due to construction for the game. So they said, forget about the park, we're putting the Olympics here. But he was very happy to have the Olympics. He was enthusiastic about what's going to happen to the city afterwards. So the dog problem. I can touch on this a little bit later. This is I have two stories to tell, and I can go into some of the question period afterwards if you guys like. This is probably the lengthiest part of my presentation, and I'm already running a little bit slow here, I see. But I guess I can continue this later into the question period if that's okay. I don't know if you guys are going to have a ton of questions, but we'll skip the dog thing, come back to it if that's all right. There we go. Okay. While we're talking about animals, orcas. There were supposed to be 7 orcas. They were captured from the Khutotsk Sea. And they were like, they're bringing orcas to Sochi, and they're going to display them during the games. Animal activists were up in arms. They were saying, oh my God, you can't do that. That's ridiculous. They did capture the orcas, and they were on their way to Sochi. I think somebody quietly diverted them. They didn't show up. It didn't happen, long story short. 5 of them are in China, and 2 of them are in Moscow being trained to be shown elsewhere, which is still really unfortunate. But, I mean, it's like, Sochi, they're bringing in orcas. Well, they didn't bring in orcas, technically. I don't know. So that was how that played out. Planning and infrastructure, huge when it came to the games. This picture is my first site when I got off at Rosa Khutor Extreme Park, which is where they held the moguls, the half pipe, and one other event, I forget which. But I got off, and I had to walk this 10 minutes downhill. It was mud, it was rocky, it was crappy snow as we see here in Alberta that's sort of half frozen, half melted, and I'm lucky I got some light hiking shoes because my other ones wouldn't have fared so well. I wasn't told about this, I wasn't warned about this. If I was a small child, I probably would have been like traipsing in the mud and stuff, and it isn't really something that you would want to see from, the clean, bright, come see the Olympics because we're prepared. This area wasn't quite as prepared. It was a 15-minute hike out, again, on the same thing, even longer, uphill at night. If I had a walker or if I had a small child, it would be a real issue, and that kind of perturbed me a little bit that they made all the spectators from the stand full of spectators, all had to walk up this 15-minute walk just to get to a gondola to get down. Then we got on a bus and went back to the coastal cluster. One other thing I'll quickly touch on there, snow was an issue. Sochi is statistically the warmest city to ever host the Winter Olympic Games, and they thought that snow would be a problem because it's warm. Winter Olympics doesn't really work. Fortunately, it did work. The 50-kilometer difference between Adler and Krasnaya Polyana made about 10 to 15 degree difference between there. So it was 15 degrees on the coast, 0 up in the mountains. They were skiing, no problem, and we were walking around in t-shirts and shorts. So that was cool. Again, planning infrastructure. There were some solar and wind-powered street lamps at the Adler train station. This is outside. Solar lamps, and they couldn't really be bothered to put the sod in, so it makes you wonder, obviously they were very hurried with the preparation for the games, and kind of makes me curious what their priorities are. They did have 7 years to get that done, but this was a common occurrence, seeing landscaping that just wasn't done. I don't know, it could have been a lot of issues as well with workers that weren't being paid. Bring in some workers, they would do some work, and then they would get tired because they weren't getting their paychecks. They would leave, they would bring in a new busload of workers, and the cycle would repeat. It's rather unfortunate. Human Rights Watch has a 150-page report on the employment issues surrounding the Sochi 2014 Games. I didn't have time to read it, but if you were interested, that would be something to check out. Almost all construction was halted. I don't think I saw a single semi-truck while it was there. All of the construction and preparation and stuff was just None, zero during the games, aside from these guys who were finishing some bricklaying near the Sochi train station. Behind them, more interestingly, was scaffolding from which cloth banners were hung. On the banners were printed an image of what the building behind it would look like if it were complete. So you saw this all the time along the train line. You would just see buildings that looked kind of odd and square, and you'd be like, oh, that's a banner. Okay, so put a banner on it. Right. It was a very common thing. So it's interesting because parts of the city were deemed unfit to show to the public. They didn't want the tourists that were coming to Sochi, the people that hadn't seen the city, to think that it was what it was. They wanted to say, this is actually what our city looks like. This is ulica Chernovitskaya, basically means Chernovitskaya Street. That's where I was staying. Like I said, more potholes than there were blades of grass. The Sochi Games were a $51 billion investment, minus $30 billion of corruption and embezzlement. But in my opinion, it was an economy that just wasn't ready for that rapid scale of development and that speed. So things, like I said, with the workers' issues, things just didn't happen because there wasn't the infrastructure to build those venues and to build that train line and just get ready for that mass amount of people in such a short period of time, even though they had 7 years. Security. Everybody said, oh my God, you're going to Russia. That's not safe. Are you going to be safe? Is it safe? What's going on? There were 2 bombings in Volgograd, 600 kilometers east of Sochi in December 2013, so about a month and a half before the games. That scared a lot of people because a lot of terrorism groups said, we're going to make the games hell. We're going to cause problems if you try to hold the Olympics there. Putin went ahead with it anyway. Long story short, there weren't any security breaches, major breaches. There were 2 airplanes that were hijacked near Sochi. One was on its way to Sochi and one went to Turkey, I believe. But everybody landed safe and you didn't really hear anything around the park. There weren't security issues. Everything seemed to be relatively quiet. So there was a comprehensive security bubble that guarded entry to Olympic Park and all train stations. So it was interesting. You could go through security at a train station and say in Sochi, and then you could get on the train, ride all the way to the mountain cluster, get off the mountains, get on a bus, go up to the venue, get off and view the venue without going through security again. So it was a comprehensive system where they kept you, they knew that these people went through security and we can move them about from venue to venue or place to place or as they wish, and we don't have to put them through security again. So to reduce the impact on the people there was an engineer behind that somewhere, and I was rather impressed by it. Like I said, no major security breaches reported. 100,000 personnel were dispatched to Sochi between security, army, police, and Navy personnel. They were keeping things safe. The picture on the left there is a ship that was on the coast of the Black Sea, so you could see them off in the distance at any point. The top and bottom are the campout and some of the army soldiers that were placed along the train line. They would just walk in the riverbed below the train line that was at an appropriate level so that it didn't have to go up or down through the mountains, through the valleys, whatever, all the way to the mountain cluster. And they would just walk, and sometimes they were going in opposite directions, sometimes they were with each other, and they were just doing their thing. So that brings me to another point. There were so many security, so many staff that sometimes you saw them get a little bit bored. You can see this. I think he would be a sergeant on his cell phone at a train station. I don't know if he was paying a lot of attention. This guy looks pretty thrilled to be doing what he's doing. So does overstaffing lead to carelessness when it comes to security around the games? Security in Adler was relaxed at times. Apparently that was to reduce the impact on tourists and visitors. They said, oh yeah, we keep it tight on the outside, the ring of steel as they called it, so that people inside don't have to go through security that's really harsh every single time. I don't know how much I believe that. The one time I did get close to the perimeter there, security was pretty tight, and they're like, hey, accreditation, and I had it, and I'm like, okay. So in Sochi, things were definitely tighter, and there may have been some truth to that. Moving to protests when we're talking about security. Were there protests in Sochi? Everybody said, oh my God, like animal rights and gay rights and stuff, we're gonna like protest and cause all sorts of problems. Putin said, no, you go here, and like 50 people twice did. That's about it. There were 2 protests that happened in Sochi during the games, which is a rather small number compared to how many people said there were going to be. One of them drew attention to the plight of Russians in World War II, and the other supported Putin. So nothing, nothing about animal activism or gay rights or anything like that. There were some new laws that were passed in Russia just before the games started that banned gay propaganda in the presence of minors, which bans all events like pride parades, which is kind of crappy when it comes to people in Russia that might be LGBT. This is Anastasia Busis. She is a speed skater. She competed in Vancouver and Sochi. She is openly lesbian. I spoke to her about the games, and she said, the media hasn't even asked me about it. I haven't heard about it. It hasn't been an issue, hasn't impacted me at all. It's been really quiet. She described the Olympic Park as the eye of the storm in a way that when you were there, you didn't really hear about all the things that were supposed to happen leading up to the games. It was very quiet. It was focused on the sport. Everybody was just, I didn't have time to sit and browse Twitter to keep up on what was going on in Canada or let alone the Ukraine. It was difficult to hear what was going on outside when there was so much going on inside, and you were just so busy day to day. I walked like 17,000 steps, which is about 10,000 more than I walk on any given day. It was a lot of distance to cover, and you're very busy, regardless of what you're doing, just transportation and everything. How am I doing for time here? Oh, look, I'm over time. What should I do?
We'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. I could try. This is Pussy Riot. They are a protest band. They draw attention to everything that is anti-Putin. They perform in public, and they write songs that are anti-Putin and everything. They showed up. They tried to do a performance under a big Sochi banner. Cossacks showed up, which are militiamen, basically, and they started pepper spraying them and beating them. The video is a little disturbing, and it brings me to my next point, which is censorship in Russia, which was, going in, I'm like, is this China-scale censorship where the state controls the media? And it wasn't quite that bad. The people there are aware of it, and they can get around it, but it's definitely apparent. They were jailed a number of times for thefts they didn't commit, for things that weren't happening. It was just the government trying to do everything that they could to snuff Pussy Riot as their biggest critic. Yevgeny Vitishko was another environmental critic. Leading up to the games, he drew attention to a lot of environmental issues that were going on. He was thrown in jail for 15 days during court proceedings. He was supposed to be released, given time to say goodbye to his family and collect his things before being sent off to a penal colony. He mysteriously disappeared and went to the penal colony anyway. So, again, the government just being kind of shady with things. I don't know if I have time to talk about this. They said, we're watching you, basically, long story short. They said, if you come to the games, you will be hacked, you will be watched, you will be monitored, all communications are transparent, and that imposed on me a form of self-censorship, basically. So I had to watch what I was saying for fear of my own safety, pretty much. Was somebody going to come to my door and drag me out of the country type thing? The worst they could do now is not allow me back. But, the fact that they published all the numbers about how they were going to watch everybody that was there, including athletes and officials and tourists and journalists, was a way of imposing self-censorship on people that were there. I had to be careful about what I said and what pictures I posted. For instance, I kept that picture of the army man using his cell phone until I left and I was in Heathrow Airport. Then I posted it, so I was out of the country. And it's rather effective. People have to watch what they say, for they fear for their own safety. I feel like I'm going to get cut off here.
I don't have a big cane or anything.
Okay. I'll try to make this quick. Channel 1, Channel 2, Channel 3, don't trust them, that's all Putin's TV, said the man I was living with when the things with Ukraine came up. It was, they were just starting and everybody was sort of curious what was going on. He wanted to know, but he was watching Reuters TV on his iPad instead of watching the TV, because he said, you can't trust it, it's all biased. Mark McKinnon, he's a journalist for the Globe and Mail. His tweet summed it up very nicely. Ukraine police close on protesters, at least 5 reported dead. And Russia Today said, policemen killed as rioters attack government buildings. So they said only a policeman was killed, that's it. Again, biased media when it's state-controlled, and it is something similar to the situation in China, which was rather unfortunate. My last thing here, what about the city? What's happening? They have planned all sorts of things. This is a rendering of what the Formula One track will look like. I say it's an excuse. I would be lying by omission if I didn't say that Sydney did the same thing in 2002. They installed a Formula One track and continue to bring people there. They already have an entry gate. They already have a big bunch of flat paved land. So put a Formula One track on it. Bring some people there.